So before
Awesome.
we close off here, I do want to talk about Daniel Hale.
Yep.
Is this an issue I want to talk more in depth with Glory Jones, whose tweet I'm showing here? She said Daniel Hale, who blew the whistle on the draconian U.S. military drone program, is scheduled to be sentenced tomorrow. This was yesterday. He faces harsh conditions for the crime of exposing the empire, while those who ordered illegal drone strikes remain celebrated by the state. Celebrated by entertainment and all that, like Barack Obama, Joe Biden is our president, who's complicit. Nancy Pelosi, all of them. So in this picture here, it says Daniel Hill, he exposed the widespread murder of civilians by U.S. drone strikes. Faces up to 10 years in prison for revealing information in the public interest. The U.S. government threatens to use further charges if unsatisfied with harshness of sentence. And then here's a quote from him: said, "Left to decide whether to act, I only could do that which I ought to do before God and my own conscience. The answer that came to me, that to stop cycle of violence, I ought to sacrifice my own life and not that of another person." And then here's an article by Chris Hedges that you guys could check out to get an update on what happened, in more detail. But pretty much, Hale is sentenced for 45 months. And Chris Hedges writes that Daniel Hale, a former intelligence analyst in the drone program in the Air Force, who has a private contractor in 2013, leaked some 17 classified documents about drone strikes to the press, was sentenced Tuesday to 45 months in prison. The documents, published by The Intercept on October 15, 2015, exposed that between January 2012 and February 2013, U.S. Special Operations airstrikes killed more than 200 people. Of those, only 35 were intended targets. For one 5-month period of the operation, according to the documents, nearly 90% of the people killed in airstrikes were not the intended targets. The civilian dead, usually innocent bystanders, were routinely classified as enemies killed in action. And that's something that the average American doesn't really think about, how most of these airstrikes aren't killing our targets, it's killing innocent people.
Well, and
These
I've
are
heard
our
that they
bombs, our
label.
taxpayers.
I've heard that when they say enemies killed in action, it could be that an innocent person was killed, but if they're a young man of military age, they're just classified as an enemy combatant just because of who they are, even if they weren't.
Yeah. It's the excuses that they come up with, right? Like what you just mentioned, Kobe. And then people who are still in the two-party illusion make excuses for why their team, the Democrats or the Republicans, bombed the country. They're like, "Oh, we had to do it because of terrorists, or because we're trying to stabilize the country, or if we don't do it, then things are going to be worse." But in actuality, we're doing it because we want to obtain those resources for the corporations that pay our politicians. So Chris Hedges goes on to say the Justice Department coerced Hale, who was deployed to Afghanistan in 2012, on March 31st to plead guilty to one count of violating the Espionage Act, a law passed in 1917 designed to prosecute those who passed on state secrets to a hostile power, not those who exposed the public government lies and crimes. Hale admitted as part of the plea deal to retention and transmission of national security information and leaking 11 classified documents to a journalist. If he had refused the plea deal, he could have spent 50 years in prison. And here's a tweet by Edward Snowden saying that Daniel Hale, one of the great American whistleblowers, was just moments ago sentenced to 4 years in prison. His crime was telling the truth. 90% of those killed by U.S. drones are bystanders, not the intended targets. He should have been given a medal. But right now, people are distracted by, in the Olympics, in which people are given medals, and I mean, it's fine to have like our escapism, but we got to be informed about the things that are happening, right?
Yeah,
Um,
this is abhorrent. This is disgusting. This is criminal. And let's we've seen what's happened with other whistleblowers. We've seen what's happened with Chelsea Manning. We're seeing obviously what's happening with Julian Assange. We're seeing what's happening with Stephen Donziger. We're seeing what's happened with Edward Snowden, and take a look at some other journalists who have spoken out and were killed for speaking up. First person that comes to mind is Jamal Khashoggi. And earlier, about an hour and a half ago, I mentioned surveillance and technology, and the obviously with Pegasus. For all we know, America might already have this Pegasus software and might already be surveilling.
It's an Israeli firm. I almost guarantee it.
By the NSO group. It might already be surveilling other activists and other journalists here. And you mix that in with big tech and the censorship that's happening in the tech from Twitter, Facebook, etc. And let's not forget, the reason that we have mass surveillance in the United States is none other than our current president, Joe Biden. He wrote the Counterterrorism Act of 1995. It never got approved in Congress, but then when September 11th happened, George Bush reached out to Joe Biden. Joe Biden went ahead and rewrote the bill, added more money to it, created an entire new government agency called the Department of Homeland Security, and then remixed everything that was in the Counterterrorism Act of 1995 and then called it the Patriot Act. So the reason we have mass surveillance right now is Joe Biden.
Yep.
Daniel Hale should never see the inside of a jail cell. And the fact that he was threatened with 50 years in jail tells you how truly avaricious and how truly just disgusting the United States government truly is. It's ridiculous what's happening.
And it's so crazy because that 50 years in jail is if he stands by his conscience and doesn't give a plea deal, doesn't say that what he did was wrong. I imagine that 50 years is if he goes by his conscience and keeps to his word. Whereas that plea deal they gave him, he has to admit that it was wrong of him to have done these things. You know, that's what it's about for them.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And again, you mentioned Black Lives Matter, and I've mentioned some of the books here. Derek Chauvin killed a man and got 22 and a half years. Daniel Hale told the truth about what's happened in the Middle East, and he was threatened with, and Daniel Hale didn't kill anybody. Drone strikes actually killed people, innocent people.
He revealed 160 people getting killed, 160 innocent people.
160 innocent people getting killed, and he was threatened with 50 years behind bars. And I guarantee you that's federal prison, which isn't a country club. So just to put that in perspective, and to take it even a step further, Julian Assange, who is not an American citizen, I think is looking at, I want to say 140 years in prison.
It's like 175, yeah.
Or 175 years in prison, and he is not an American citizen. So, again, the hypocrisy of the United States, just when you think they cannot be more duplicitous, you're seeing it more and more on a day-to-day basis. And Daniel Hale receiving a 45-month sentence for telling the truth says everything you need to know about the United States.
Embarrass the government by telling the truth about them and the disgusting things that they do, and you receive some of the harshest punishments. That's the country that we live in.
Yeah.
That's a fascist state.
And it's a failed state. Because we
doesn't take care of its people.
Yep.
Anybody who wants to report on that is a threat.
Yep.
Look at that recent that you guys saw, like that plan that Joe Biden has of going after people, and he calls them all domestic terrorists, and it's really vague, right? And pretty much anybody who protests against the government, who's an anti-capitalist, would be considered an enemy of the state or domestic terrorist.
Yeah,
we're a threat to them, and that's why we can't be bootlicking them. We can't be making excuses for politicians who are complicit in this and enable these people. We have to be calling that out. So yeah, Daniel Hale is a hero. I don't know if you guys have any final words on that. But I do want to cover that in more depth later on in another video.
All I will say is, I think especially on the left, and I think especially for you guys, and I include myself in this too, because it'll be me like doing similar stuff now. Telling the truth can get you killed. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the sad state of affairs right now. You know, that in order to do the right thing, in order to tell the truth, is going to get you in trouble, or at worst, you lose your life over it. And
True.
so I really think, and this is something actually in thinking about my channel now, I don't think I'm going to go into necessarily as deep into issues that you do, Franco, depending on the circumstance, but all the same, you know, like it's still that idea of talking about things that are countercultural to, you know, like what the establishment forces us to think. So the question is, I think all of us need to ask is, in a lot of ways, are we willing to lose our lives over it? You know, because
Yeah.
if we can't, then you know, return in the Matrix.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean,
But for those of us who are willing to, you know that this is something that you're going to come up against, and that's why, you know, I really appreciate you, Franco, because I know, like, you know, just how you've been demonetized and how you've been speared, and like how, like, you know, the powers that be have tried to do everything to try to cut your channel, like try to, you know, cut your income, you know, as far as building this channel. So the idea that you're willing to do this and push through that, I think in a lot of ways has been really, and not just you, but other people who are in this work, has really been inspiring to me, you know, for starting my channel and kind of doing the same thing, you know, with the knowledge that that could very well be me as well. But I think for you, just to kind of lead the way into and kind of showing us, like, this is what it means to kind of tell the truth. And this is the things that you're going to come up against for people that do not want to know the truth. But I think all of us are kind of at that point in thinking about, is this something that we're willing to give up our lives for?
Yeah,
And
I
I'm sure,
appreciate-
like, for my dad, you know, as a Pan-Africanist, I haven't talked to him about this necessarily, but I'm pretty sure, you know, like in his truth, he probably thought about that in terms of his family. You know, am I going to put my effort into the movement, but possibly not do what I need to do for my family in the process, or be with my family, but knowing the truth, not able to publicly promote it? And he chose the movement. And that's something as a child I didn't quite understand, you know, in terms of, because, you know, my dad, you know, really wasn't around. And then I lived with my mom mostly. And then I had a lot of issues with him, you know, growing up. But now as an adult, I kind of get what he was doing. I think in a lot of ways he did that to protect me, you know, in the sense of, you know, not having to possibly lose him early on if something ever happened to him, possibly. So, but I think for all of us who are trying to discover truth and kind of teach truth, that's a reality that we have to kind of make sense of, and are we willing to go through that? And so, you know, again, like Daniel Hale, you know, is a hero. But I also say for you, Franco, and other commentators like you, thank you for the work that you're doing, because it's not easy. And it's like, and you don't necessarily have to do this, but, you know, you being able to push through that, you know, I think is very, you know, commendable. And I'm sure other people have said that to you. But
I appreciate that, Colin. Thank you. Thank you for those kind words. And yeah, that's like, what you're saying is so heavy to accept for a lot of people. It's like, it's so easy to want to stay and have a comfortable life where you're not a threat. Just sitting back, enjoying your escapism, watching your movies, watching sports, or whatever it is that you do, it's easy. But if you don't at least participate in trying to, like, this is just how I feel. If I'm not participating and informing people, then I'm hurting myself because I'm letting the country get worse gradually, incrementally. It gets worse. We don't notice it. And then like look at where the state is now. Like, where we are now is so much worse than where we were in 40 years because we've allowed these corporations to get more powerful and to have more control over these politicians. It's so much harder now to have, the like changes in the country that we need. So it's a hard truth that we have to, come to if we want to inform people. But in the long run, it's worth it. And they do try to stop you, like to try to stop you from gaining anything, financially from this, trying to make a living off of this. Look at what they're doing to Ryan Christian of The Last American Vagabond. They banned him off of Venmo, PayPal, Patreon, where he relies on, the donations from his audience members. And we're not going to, I don't think we should be surprised if they come after smaller channels like mine, or growing channels, I should say. I don't want to limit, ourselves, Colin, Joe, like, I don't think we should call ourselves small channels. We should call ourselves growing channels because we're helping to grow people's consciousness, and it's just going to be attractive to people, and that's going to spread like dominoes. But yeah, guys, thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate the conversation.
Of course, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Franco.